Hey everyone, welcome back to Six Path Weeb. You're tuned into my anime fanfic channel where we dive into epic what-if scenarios and reimagine your favorite characters in brand new worlds. Today's episode, what if Naruko faced Konoha as a Straw Hat? Part 2. Disclaimer, this content is created purely for entertainment and fan discussion. I do not own any of the anime clips featured, all rights and credits belong to their original creators and copyright holders. Alright, let's jump right into it. When Sanji opened his eyes, all he could see were trees swaying gently above him. It took him a few moments to recall what had happened before everything went dark. Once the memories rushed back, he quickly stood up and scanned the area for any signs of danger. Sensing no immediate threats, he furrowed his brows and continued to examine the unfamiliar scenery. A soft mumble from his right caught his attention. Turning swiftly, he saw Chopper sitting up and rubbing his eyes, looking as though he had just woken from a long nap. Reflecting on it, Sanji realized he wasn't quite sure how long he had been unconscious. Nearby, the green-haired swordsman was lying a short distance away. "Wah, Sanji? Where are we?" the small doctor asked as he looked around, his eyes finally focusing. "No idea. Is the moss head still breathing?" Sanji replied, lighting a cigarette and watching as Chopper rushed over to check. Even though Zoro was clearly snoring, Chopper felt compelled to make sure. Sanji rolled his cigarette between his fingers, trying to piece together what had led them here. The last thing he remembered was being pulled into a strange vortex by a mysterious figure from the Akatsuki. Now they were standing in a forest? Something was definitely off. Deciding not to dwell on it just yet, Sanji walked over to the swordsman and nudged his side, not out of irritation this time, but to wake him. Chopper gave Sanji a disapproving look, but the blonde ignored it. The swordsman stirred with a groggy grunt. Sanji patiently waited for Zoro to gather his senses before speaking again. "Get up. We need to figure out where we are." His voice was calm but firm as he tapped Zoro again with the toe of his shoe. Zoro stood slowly, glancing around to assess the situation. Once Sanji confirmed they were all alert, he turned toward a random direction and signaled the others to follow. He didn't know where he was heading, but moving forward felt better than staying still. Still, a strange feeling lingered in his chest. "Robin. You're awake." Usopp's relieved voice reached the archaeologist as she blinked herself back into consciousness. She realized she was being carried by none other than the Straw Hat Pirate's eccentric shipwright. Frankie grinned and gently lowered her to her feet. "Yes, thank you," Robin said with a soft smile, brushing off any concern. "Where are we?" Usopp shrugged, clearly uncertain, and Frankie didn't seem to have any answers either. Robin listened as Usopp explained they had been walking for a while, hoping to find a clue about their location. So far, all they'd seen were endless trees and a gently flowing river. "Have you tried contacting the others? You have a baby Den Mushi, right? I remember Nami and Sanji carried one as well," Robin suggested as they continued walking. "I thought about that," Frankie replied, scratching his head, "but I figured we should figure out where we are first. It just seems simpler that way." Robin pursed her lips slightly, not quite agreeing. Usopp noticed her expression and let out a nervous chuckle. Robin then paused in her steps, prompting the others to stop as well. Crossing her arms, she activated her powers, creating eyes all around the area to get a better look. She focused carefully, extending her vision further with each new vantage point. At first, all she could see were trees in every direction. But after a while, she caught a glimpse of movement, figures in the distance. Among the greenery, she spotted a group of 4 people, 3 men and 1 woman. Intrigued, Robin created an ear nearby to listen in, taking care to keep it well hidden. "What's the point of heading that way? I thought our lead was in the land of sound?" said one of the men with unusually sharp teeth. Robin tilted her head slightly in thought, wondering if they were natural or altered. He seemed to be arguing with another man, one with black hair who appeared to be the leader. "Are you questioning me, Suigetsu?" the leader replied with a cold glare. Suigetsu mumbled something Robin couldn't make out, prompting the lone woman in the group to scold him. The team continued forward until the leader addressed her. "Karen. Stay alert." The red-haired woman nodded and quickly apologized. Robin watched with curiosity as she took a deep breath and closed her eyes. It seemed unusual, but then the woman suddenly gasped and turned toward Robin's direction. "There's a group of 3 about 2 miles east. Their energy feels unusual," Karen said. Robin froze. Could the woman sense them? Was she using a technique like Kenbunshaku Haki? But then Karen added more. "There's 1 woman and 2 men. The men seem ordinary, but the woman's energy. It's scattered, Like it's not flowing as it should. That level of detail went beyond what Haki could sense. Robin realized they were dealing with something different, something called chakra, perhaps. Are they a threat? The leader asked. I don't think so. They're walking away from us. Probably just resting, Karen replied. The group continued on without changing direction, and Robin allowed her extra senses to fade. She turned back to Frankie and Usopp, who were already eager to hear what she had learned. I found out where we are, she said with a faint chuckle. And I picked up some fascinating local terminology. Usopp looked confused, prompting Robin to explain further. We're in the land of sound. There's something the locals refer to as chakra. I believe it's a kind of life force, or at least that's the impression I got. She laughed softly into her hand as her friends exchanged amazed glances. The citizens of Sunagakure were experiencing a rather unusual day. Especially for the sister of the Kazekage, it felt as if fate itself had chosen to disrupt her rare day off with the bizarre scene unfolding in front of her. A surprising feat, considering she didn't usually believe in fate to begin with. Tamari had simply been walking near the village gates, hoping to pass the time, when she nearly bumped into two unfamiliar young adults, and a skeleton, of all things. Initially alarmed, she almost reported the strange trio to her brother, but then the red-haired young woman stepped forward politely and asked for assistance. She explained that they were lost and unsure of their location. Moments later, Tamari found herself in her brother's office, searching through shelves for a map while the Kazekage silently stared at the back of her head, his patience wearing thin. So, Tamari-san, was it? The 9-foot-tall skeleton began, breaking the awkward silence that filled the room. Tamari glanced over her shoulder as he continued. Would it be all right if he began, but his sentence was cut short by a loud, comedic thud and a startled yelp, followed by laughter that echoed through the office. Unsurprisingly, Gaara's sand began to stir in the room's airspace. It took a moment for everything to settle again. As Tamari resumed her search among the scrolls and documents that her brother never seemed to organize, she listened to the conversation behind her. If it makes you feel any better, I've got just as much of a headache as you do, the red-haired woman commented, presumably to the Kazekage. Unsurprisingly, he didn't respond. The cheerful young man with the straw hat laughed again and began chatting away with the woman, though Tamari didn't catch all of it. Luffy, could you please? Pura puru. A strange, rhythmic sound interrupted her words. The room froze as the noise continued until the woman reached into her back pocket and retrieved what looked like a snail with a curious windmill symbol on its shell. Upon closer look, Tamari noticed the same symbol tattooed on the woman's left arm. Hello? The woman said to the snail, which blinked open its eyes with a soft click. To Tamari and Gaara's amazement, the creature spoke back in the concerned voice of a woman. Nami. Robin. The trio exclaimed in unison. Luffy? Brooke? I'm so glad to hear your voices. I was worried something serious had happened and you'd ended up separated and alone, the snail replied. The voice then changed, now sounding like a surprised young man. Robin. Don't say scary things like that. The snail exclaimed. Usopp, you're there too? Is anyone else with you? Is everyone all right? And what happened to that strange man we encountered? Nami asked urgently. Frankie's here too, Robin's voice returned. We ended up transported the same way you were, so we're still unsure about the others. Her tone grew more serious, and the group's energy shifted with concern. Then. Where exactly are you? The baby Den Mushi is working, so you must be somewhere nearby, Nami replied, trying to piece things together. At that moment, Gaara cleared his throat, causing everyone to turn toward him in silence. The snail's expression transformed into surprise. You're not alone? Robin asked through the device. For a moment, Tamari braced for some kind of dramatic reaction, but to her surprise, the straw-hatted young man responded calmly. Don't worry, Robin. The people here are really kind, they're helping us. Oh, and this place is super dry and sandy, kind of like Alabasta. He added cheerfully, smiling at the siblings as if the Kazekage hadn't just glared at him moments earlier. The red-haired woman looked momentarily awkward but then simply shrugged it off. It was hard to read the skeleton's expression, if it had one at all. You're in Sunagakure, part of the Land of Wind, Tamari offered helpfully, though she wasn't sure whether this Alabasta was a real place or just a name. Thank you kindly, Robin said through the snail. We're currently somewhere in the Land of Sound. Could you direct us towards Sunagakure from here? Also, may I ask your name? Tamari, she answered. From the Land of Sound, you'll want to head southwest. The fastest route is through the Land of Fire and the Land of Rivers. Depending on your starting point, you might pass by Konoha and through the Tanzaku quarters. Once you reach the desert, look for a village. It's not hard to find since there aren't many landmarks out here. Robin acknowledged her directions thoughtfully. She seemed intelligent, enough so that Tamari instinctively remained a bit guarded. Tamari-san, the red-haired woman said, turning toward her. Would you mind staying with our friends a bit longer? I need to contact someone else. What followed made Tamari's day even stranger. She ended up giving the trio a brief tour of the village, enduring a series of skeleton-themed puns and watching in astonishment as the energetic young man devoured what looked like an entire week's worth of food in just a few hours. By the end of the day, Tamari truly understood the meaning of shared headaches. Sanji was nearly at his wits' end. He, Zoro, and Chopper had just discovered their location, and in Sanji's opinion, it couldn't have been more inconvenient. They were in the Land of Fire, only a few miles north of Konoha. After wandering through a forest filled with endless trees, they finally stumbled upon a road. Walking along it for some time, they came across a small roadside shop run by an elderly woman selling handmade trinkets. The trio decided to pause and ask for directions. The old woman, incredibly kind-hearted, even offered to cook for them after hearing Zoro's stomach growl, politely declining Sanji's offer to help in the kitchen. And so, the pirates found themselves seated outside the little store, waiting patiently as the kind woman prepared a warm meal. Sanji sat in silence, visibly tense, puffing on a cigarette while Chopper chattered cheerfully with a group of squirrels and Zoro dozed off nearby. His leg tapped anxiously against the ground as his thoughts spiraled. He had felt uneasy since waking up that morning, and now he understood why. The realization that they had landed so close to his former home only added to his confusion. What baffled him most was why they had ended up here at all, had their mysterious opponent failed to locate the QB. Was this some kind of diversion? It didn't quite add up. Letting out a quiet sigh, Sanji tried to shift his focus. Just then, the elderly woman stepped out, holding 3 steaming bowls of potato soup. Here you go, dears. I'm afraid it's not my best. I haven't had a chance to visit Konoha for proper groceries this week, she said kindly, setting one bowl aside for the napping swordsman to enjoy once he woke up. Chopper eagerly accepted a bowl, making the old woman smile warmly. We're truly grateful for your generosity, ma'am. You didn't have to go through the trouble of feeding strangers, Sanji said appreciatively, for what felt like the 10th time. Zoro, already awake, thanks to the enticing aroma of soup, rolled his eyes but kept his thoughts to himself. The old woman laughed, clearly flattered. Oh, you're too sweet. I'm just a lonely old woman who rarely sees visitors anymore, she said with a small giggle. Sanji smiled gently, always happy to bring a bit of joy to others, no matter their age. Please don't sell yourself short. It's important to me to treat every lady with the respect and attention she deserves, he said, offering one of his signature grins. Zoro snorted quietly. Speaking of respect. Thank the nice lady, Moss Head, Sanji teased, lightly nudging Zoro's shin with his foot. Predictably, the two began bickering as the soup sat forgotten between them. The elderly woman looked on with surprise. It's okay to ignore them, Chopper reassured her calmly. They do this all the time. With a blink of understanding, the woman sat down and started chatting with the friendly reindeer. As the minutes passed, the argument escalated, not aggressively, but with increasing energy. Zoro had unsheathed his swords out of frustration, and Sanji was seconds away from lighting his foot ablaze for emphasis. So, are we still heading to Konoha or? Chopper asked, his small voice cutting through the tension just as a vein in Sanji's forehead began to twitch. Sanji was quietly relieved for the distraction, especially when he noticed Zoro freeze at the mention of the village. The blonde chef gulped. I don't think that's necessary. Maybe we should go the other direction. He suggested, his voice slightly trembling. He could feel Chopper's confused gaze and tried to ignore Zoro's now pointed stare. If you go that way, you might not find any towns for days, the woman added, watching Sanji's clear discomfort. He lit another cigarette, scrambling for a convincing excuse. But before he could speak, Zoro asked sharply, have you been to Konoha before? Sanji froze. The swordsman knew instantly he had struck a chord. Sanji flinched and looked away, his gaze fixed on the ground. No, the cook answered quietly. Zoro frowned but didn't press right away. He glanced toward the elderly woman, judging whether the conversation needed more privacy, but she didn't seem the type to gossip. Enough stalling, cook. Why don't you want to go to Konoha? Zoro asked, arms crossed, his voice calm but firm. Sanji avoided eye contact, his eyes darting everywhere except toward the swordsman. Just as Zoro opened his mouth to speak again, Chopper stepped forward gently. Sanji, it's okay. You can tell us, Chopper said softly, tugging at Sanji's pant leg. The reindeer's sincere expression tugged at Sanji's heart. Zoro wouldn't admit it, but even he found Chopper's concern look hard to ignore. Sanji's visible eye softened. It's not that I don't trust you, Chopper. I just... Puru. The ring of a den mushi interrupted his sentence. Clearly relieved, Sanji quickly answered the tiny snail phone from his pocket. Sanji. Thank goodness you're okay. Usopp's voice came through loud and clear. Zoro recalled the sniper had been traveling with Robin and Frankie. Frankie and Robin are safe, and Nami, Luffy, and Brook stuck together too, Usopp continued, giving Zoro a bit of comfort. Now they just needed to regroup and return to the Sunny. Wait. Where are you guys exactly? Luffy's team ended up in Sunagakure, I think. We're somewhere in the Land of Sound. Right, Robin? Usopp asked. Sanji's eye widened at this, as if something had just clicked. Zoro noticed and narrowed his gaze. We're north of Konoha, in the Land of Fire, Chopper answered cheerfully, seemingly unaware of Sanji's growing anxiety. That's perfect. According to this helpful woman we met, Konoha is almost right between wind and sound. We can meet there and... No. Sanji's sudden outburst silenced everyone. Zoro might have stared at him in shock, but he suddenly had a face full of reindeer instead, thanks to Chopper jumping up in alarm. Zoro was fairly sure he had fur in his mouth. Chopper, please get off, he requested firmly, prompting Frankie to glance over, curious about the cook's sudden reaction. The chef had grown silent again, save for some frustrated murmuring, likely directed at himself. The reindeer stepped down with a quiet apology, and Zoro noticed that the blonde cigarette was nearly bent in half. Sanji, is there something you'd like to share? Robin asked gently, her voice laced with quiet concern. Interestingly, he didn't respond as sharply to her as he had to the swordsman. That realization stirred a bit of irritation in Zoro. Sanji looked off to the side, nervously shifting his other foot. He seemed deep in thought for a moment before he finally exhaled, took a breath, and appeared ready to speak. Zoro sensed they were approaching something that had been troubling the cook for quite some time, perhaps something rooted in the past, even before the Sabaody archipelago. On a few occasions, Zoro had heard nervous murmurs late at night regarding uncomfortable experiences. I'm sorry, Robin Schwan, but I don't think now is the right time. Sanji finally said, just as Frankie, on the other end of the den mushi, called out to check that he was still listening. I understand. Would it be better for us to meet at Tanzaku quarters? The archaeologist offered with calm patience. Another moment of silence passed before Sanji unexpectedly answered. No. It's all right. I'll handle it. Let's meet in Konoha. During a peaceful afternoon in Konohagakure, a young woman stepped out of the third training ground. She was of average height with short pink hair, and she let out a quiet sigh as she leaned back on her heels. Gazing at the ground for a moment, her head snapped up quickly when a puff of smoke appeared in front of her. You're late again, Kakashi-sensei. She remarked, hands resting on her hips. The man who emerged from the smoke gave a sheepish chuckle, scratching the back of his head. I'm not technically your sensei anymore, you know. He replied, skipping his usual excuses. Sakura shrugged nonchalantly, and Kakashi let the comment slide. In his heart, he still thought of the now 20-something Kunoichi as his student. Shall we go then? The silver-haired shinobi suggested with a smile hidden behind his mask, motioning for her to lead the way. Since Naruko's sudden disappearance, the two of them, along with Iruka, had formed a quiet tradition of meeting for ramen each week, barring long missions. Occasionally, the remaining members of the legendary trio joined them, though only when Jiraiya wasn't traveling. So, Sakura, anything interesting happen while I was away? Kakashi asked. Although not usually one for idle chat, after spending 2 months surrounded solely by adversaries, solitude didn't seem quite as appealing. Not really. Same old, she replied, but then began casually chatting about everyday village happenings. She mentioned the growing popularity of the Yamanaka flower shop and a rumor that Hinata might have developed a fondness for Kiba. Kakashi didn't pay close attention, Sakura likely knew that, but he appreciated the gentle background noise as they strolled through the village. As they waved to friends along Konoha's bustling streets, Kakashi found himself wondering when the walking had become part of their routine. They used to simply meet at Ichiraku Ramen, like Iruka was doing today, but somewhere along the way they started meeting at training grounds or near the academy. Maybe it had something to do with that strange incident involving Konohamaru and the runaway chicken. Where do you think you're going? Sakura stopped mid-sentence, and Kakashi blinked. In fact, half the street fell silent at the sudden shout. A deeper voice fired back immediately. I'm just walking, obviously. Sensing a conflict, the two shinobi exchanged glances and began weaving through the crowd to get a better view and, if necessary, step in before things got out of hand. Their attention focused on the source of the shouting. Then why are you heading toward an alley, Mosshead? I'm not. You really need to calm down. Are you criticizing my cooking now? The first voice launched into a heated rant filled with overly dramatic outrage, nothing harmful, just enough to leave parents nearby shielding their children's ears more out of confusion than concern. Kakashi's ears caught the faint metallic sound of a sword being drawn. His expression sharpened as he pushed past the last few onlookers, ready to step in. What he found was unexpected. Two men stood in the center of the open space the crowd had created. Both were clearly powerful, and both looked entirely out of place. The first had blonde hair that partially covered one side of his face and wore an expensive-looking suit. A civilian might have assumed he was an important official or businessman, but Kakashi could see he was anything but ordinary. There was a certain poise in the man's stance, and though clearly agitated, he maintained an air of control. Something about the cigarette and the goatee reminded Kakashi vaguely of Asuma. The second man resembled a samurai, though without armor. He had green hair and a scar over his left eye, coincidentally on the same side as Kakashi's hidden one. He wore a long green coat, partially open, and 3 swords hung from his hip. One of them was already in his hand, which didn't go unnoticed. Both of them radiated strength and the kind of energy that made a seasoned ninja's instincts go on high alert. Kakashi knew he needed to act before anything escalated. He cleared his throat loudly, attempting to be heard over their animated argument. Unsurprisingly, they didn't notice. The scene reminded Kakashi of the old days, when Naruko and Sasuke would bicker endlessly over trivial things, though far less dramatically than this. Still, it wasn't the time to reminisce. Excuse me. Kakashi called out, stepping confidently into their line of sight. Both men turned, surprised by the sudden interruption. The blond man looked momentarily sheepish, as if just realizing they were in public with many spectators, including children. The green-haired man, on the other hand, seemed simply irritated. What do you want? The swordsman muttered, eyes narrowing at Kakashi. The single visible eye in the drawn sword made for a rather intense impression, but the seasoned shinobi didn't flinch. He had faced plenty of intimidating expressions before. You're causing quite the scene, Kakashi said calmly, only momentarily distracted by what looked like a small, clothed reindeer with a backpack that had quietly appeared beside the two men. It might have been a summoning companion of some kind. Sanji was nearly out of breath from anxiety again. They hadn't even been in the village for a full hour, and already they had run into someone he recognized. To make things more complicated, he spotted a pink-haired young woman approaching. Without a doubt, it was Sakura. As he lit another cigarette with slightly trembling fingers, he noticed the green-haired swordsman glancing at him occasionally. Did Zoro expect him to handle the social interaction? Sanji's nerves tightened further when his old teacher shifted his gaze toward him, clearly anticipating that Sanji would be the one to speak up. They had already agreed that Chopper should remain quiet for now. Sanji swallowed hard and saw Sakura making her way over to them. It felt like the world was closing in around him. Can you direct us to the nearest hotel or inn? Sanji turned in surprise. Zoro had spoken up first. Though he seemed slightly irritated, the swordsman respectfully sheathed his blade and turned his attention toward Kakashi, who was now focused on him. Head that way and turn right at the end of the street. There's an inn just down that road, the silver-haired man replied, gesturing in the direction they had come from before the brief encounter. Sanji resisted the urge to exhale in relief and began walking away with his crewmates, until he made a critical mistake. He accidentally made eye contact with Sakura. He froze as the kunoichi looked back at him with curiosity. Each second he stood there made him feel more conspicuous. He could already see Sakura narrowing her eyes suspiciously, so he did the only thing he could think of. Melorine Tilda, a radiant lady, he exclaimed, dramatically making his way toward her. He gently took her hands in his own and offered a warm, respectful smile. My name is Sanji. May I ask yours, kind lady? He kept his tone cheerful and his expression sincere, though inwardly he cringed. He could tell his former acquaintance was confused by his approach. He dearly hoped she wouldn't mistake him for someone with bad intentions. Normally, he wouldn't mind a strong-willed woman putting him in his place, but Sakura, and the other being Lady Tsunade, were not people he wanted to upset. Haruno Sakura, she replied hesitantly after a brief pause, glancing to the side where Kakashi stood. A name as graceful as the person who bears it, Sanji said warmly. He maintained his gentle grip on her hands even as she attempted to pull away, silently chastising himself for making her uncomfortable. So, Sakura. It's time to go, Curly, the swordsman interrupted with a groan. Sanji felt a tug at the back of his coat and turned to see Chopper biting onto the fabric, clearly trying to usher him away. With a dramatic sigh and playful protest, Sanji allowed himself to be led off. He missed the cautious glance Kakashi threw his way as he waved a final goodbye to Sakura. After a few wrong turns, thanks largely to the swordsman's questionable sense of direction, the three pirates finally arrived at the inn and secured a room for two. Unfortunately, the inn had a no animals policy, so convincing the manager that Chopper was a well-mannered companion took some effort. The reindeer wasn't exactly thrilled about being treated like a pet, either. Negotiating free lodging was another challenge, as they didn't carry the local currency. Eventually, a deal was struck. Sanji would assist in the kitchen each evening, and in exchange, they could stay as long as needed. Now the trio was gathered in their shared room, discussing how to rendezvous with the rest of their crew. More precisely, two of them were planning. Zoro was testing the bed's bounce, though not sleeping. He knew better, any attempt to nap would get him promptly kicked off. So we agree, no restaurants or food stalls. Luffy would empty them in minutes, Sanji sighed, arms crossed. Maybe a landmark instead, Chopper suggested. Like that big tower or the mountain with the faces on it? Sanji shook his head. Those places are always crowded. We've already drawn unnecessary attention in the streets, and we caught the interest of someone pretty high up in the village. Zoro immediately sat upright on the bed, alarmed. Sanji winced, realizing he had said too much. He avoided eye contact and looked toward the corner of the room. What even is a shinobi, and how do you know all this? Zoro asked, clearly frustrated and confused by the cook's nervous behavior. He was starting to suspect that Sanji had visited Konoha before. Honestly, Zoro was relieved that Luffy wasn't with them right now. Their cheerful captain would probably brush the whole thing off and tell Zoro to let it go. But Zoro wanted answers. Well? He asked again, walking toward the bed the other two were sitting on. Chopper, picking up on the tension, looked conflicted, unsure whether to step in or stay out of it. Curiosity, however, kept him quietly observant. Zoro's eyes moved to Sanji's hand as the cook absent-mindedly fiddled with the pocket that held his cigarettes. He was clearly tempted to pull one out, held back only by the inn's rules. Zoro resisted the urge to press him further. Sanji looked like he was deep in thought, possibly deciding how much he was willing to share, or how he might avoid sharing anything at all. He just hoped Sanji's next move would finally bring some clarity, without making things more complicated. So in other words, you were born in Konoha, the furry doctor of the Straw Hat Pirates clarified, thoughtfully processing the story Sanji had just shared. And the 5 great shinobi countries exist in a completely different world from our own? He continued, still slightly overwhelmed by the revelation. As far as I can tell, the chef confirmed with a nod. Chopper mirrored the gesture slowly, then with increasing certainty as he accepted the reality. The green-haired swordsman scoffed, shaking his head with visible skepticism. And what's the reason for avoiding that village? I figured you'd be glad to visit your hometown, he said, raising an eyebrow. Chopper wasn't sure why the swordsman seemed upset now that Sanji had revealed something so personal, but he decided not to press further. Try to understand, Moss Head, the blonde replied with a colder tone than usual. Maybe there's a reason I left in the first place. Though he wasn't yelling as he often did during their arguments, his voice carried the weight of something more serious. Chopper sighed in quiet relief when Zoro simply grunted and went to lie down on his bed without pushing the matter. So, when the others get here, could you maybe give us a little tour? The small reindeer asked tentatively, concerned he might have overstepped. But he felt a quiet pride at breaking the heavy silence that had settled over them. His heart eased when Sanji offered a faint, genuine smile and nodded in agreement. A graceful voice echoed through the peaceful forest clearing. Ocho Fleur, clutch. With those words, 4 pairs of arms sprouted from the ground and the back of the startled ninja. He found himself gently but firmly held, arms, legs, and chin restrained, 2 hands supporting his back, leaving him unable to move or reach his tools. The young shinobi's pulse quickened with every step the elegant woman took toward him. Her smile was serene, though it held an intensity that unsettled him. Even her 2 companions behind her, clearly close friends based on their previous interactions, seemed a little surprised by her expression. Now then. We're going to need a bit of information, she said, her tone warm and calm. The young ninja wasn't surprised, information gathering was often a part of encounters like this. But he had been trained to remain composed, even under extreme stress, and intended to stay silent. Still, as the dark-haired woman leaned in closer, speaking softly and meeting his gaze, he felt a bead of nervous sweat trail down his neck. Her questions, though gently delivered, threw him off balance. "What is chakra? How does it work? Are we anywhere near the Grand Line?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. The contrast between her calm tone and her mysterious smile made him hesitate. After a moment, he decided it couldn't hurt to share what he assumed was common knowledge. See, chakra is energy, both physical and spiritual. Every living being has it. It flows through pathways in the body and is essential for using shinobi techniques, he explained. Then added, a little confused, "I don't know what the Grand Line is." All three strangers appeared surprised, exchanging looks as if they'd just confirmed something important. The young shinobi began to wonder if they truly were from another world. The woman's smile brightened again, not unkindly, but enough to make him wonder if he'd said something wrong. "I see. Thank you for your help. Could you tell us how to get to Konohagakure?" she asked, now more composed. The young ninja mentioned a map stored in his pouch, just moments before everything around him faded from view. The three pirates observed as the unconscious figure of the young girl dropped gently to the ground. Robin calmly deactivated her devil fruit ability and leaned down to retrieve the map the girl had mentioned. The girl couldn't have been older than 14, yet she carried sharp tools and other potentially dangerous items with surprising familiarity, as though she had grown used to handling them. Was it really necessary to knock her out? The long-nosed sniper asked after a brief silence, still processing the situation. A chill had run down his spine watching the archaeologist's calm, calculated move. He still occasionally wondered if Robin had once been part of a more mysterious past before joining the Straw Hat crew. "She's clearly been trained for combat. If I hadn't intervened, there's a chance she might have pursued us," Robin replied, smiling gently over her shoulder. Usopp stared at her with a mix of unease and awe, only half aware of the cyborg beside him giving his back a supportive pat. Sakura let out a deep sigh as she leaned back against the door she had just closed behind her. Finally, she was home. The day had left her mentally drained, especially after her odd encounter with two unfamiliar men in the street. The blonde one had been charming in his own way, but something about him had unsettled her. Later, when they arrived at Ichiraku Ramen, Kakashi mentioned that he'd felt a strange sense of familiarity from the man with the unusual eyebrows. Oddly enough, it was the same feeling Sakura herself had experienced when she'd looked into the man's bright eyes. As her gaze landed on an old photo of Team 7, memories rushed back. Her thoughts still lingered on the mysterious man, and it suddenly clicked. The expression in his eyes. They reminded her of Naruko. Sakura stood frozen, the realization striking her like lightning. She reached for the photo, studying it more closely. In her mind, she could still recall those same azure eyes, soft, warm, and filled with a quiet strength. The same way Naruko used to look at her before their team truly came together. At first, she had dismissed the man as someone strange, but looking back, there had been something deeper, an urgency, even a trace of fear, as if he had wanted to run away from something he couldn't quite face. But there was no way he could be Naruko, the energetic, bright-hearted kunoichi who once filled the village with laughter and mischief. Or could he? Alright guys, that's a wrap for today. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to like, share, and hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, stay awesome. Much love. Six Path Weeb.